I considered myself a German with a Jewish religion or Israelite religion. Going back to my parents and grandparents, they were born in Germany, they lived in Germany in different towns. My dad served in the German army, was German. The fact that the Nazis then defined Jewish religion as a race, that really wouldn't alter that. And then I left the country. I was able to leave it unharmed. I came back as a soldier. I managed to go through the whole war. And I hated the Germans, and I hated everything really connected with it. I took some pictures at Buchenwald. We were able to get into Buchenwald before the Germans and before the guards had a chance to kill everybody in the camp. I knew that my parents and grandparents were in that camp. I doubted very much that they were in Buchenwald. The question still arose whether they survived, whether they were still living. The war ended, and I was ready to go home to the United States. And I just all of a sudden found myself in Nuremberg as an interpreter to the prison psychiatrist. And that really made a very big consolation. It could not bring back my parents. It could not bring back any relatives. It could not bring back any life that I have lost. But it certainly was satisfaction to have these people and monsters in a prison cell in front of me, where I was the victor and they were the vanquished.
This is my father. He was born in 1923 in Munich. His given name was Hans-Heinz Triest. He changed it when he arrived in America to separate himself from the past. But in many ways, my father's German identity remains intact.
We're showing a film which I took in 1947. And I happen to have about the same figure that I have now. I did have a little more hair, and as you can see, I produced it, I directed it, and I filmed it. I used a camera, which I managed to buy very expensively with a couple packs of cigarettes. And I believe it was one of the first documentary films, at least by a member of the occupation forces. And I was back there in 1947, the city of Munich, especially the inner core of the city, and also many of the outskirts, was about 90% destroyed.
Munich had been home to the Triests for many generations.
The building on the right is our apartment house.
My father returned to the city for a year after his duties at the Nuremberg trial. Those who had ruined the life he had known now lived in ruin.
When you're there to do what you think is right, it's nice to see that what you have done was complete.
A sense that justice has been done is redemptive to my father.
I thought it was just great. The only thing
Nazism destroyed the hope that anyone could be both German and Jewish.
This is the Hauptbahnhof. That's the main railroad station. Now that is
My father denied Nazism this surrender.
on one side of
by reclaiming his story from its wreckage.
These pictures reveal the arrogance with which the German warlords meet the charges of criminal injustice to civilized people. Prosecutor Robert Jackson of the United States opens the trial with a strong indictment of the defendants.
The privilege of opening the first trial in history for crimes against the peace of the world imposes a grave responsibility. The wrongs which we seek to condemn and punish.
The room was bigger then than today.
There are still echoes in room 600 at the Nuremberg Superior Court, where Chief Justice Ewald Beerschmidt informs my father and me about its history. My brother Glenn is also here. Glenn is a professional still photographer, continuing my father's interest in film.
And when the Judgment Day came in Nuremberg on 1st of October 46, each of the defendants came out of that door.
Hermann Wilhelm Göring. There are 21 left in the dock to face civilization's accusation.
From indictment to verdict, the Nuremberg Tribunal lasted 1 year. Allied prosecutors presented a comprehensive case that remains the most extensive record of Nazi atrocities and war crimes. With other top Nazi leaders already dead, the 21 defendants came before the court, the personification of Nazi evil, all intent on diminishing their roles.
Ob ich mich schuldig oder nicht schuldig bekenne.
Hermann Göring, Hitler's designated heir and chief of the Air Force.
You must plead guilty or not guilty. Bekenne mich im Sinne der Anklage nicht schuldig.
Göring was the first to plea. The other 20 defendants would follow his lead of disavowal. In his testimony, Göring asserted that neither he nor Hitler knew of the plan to exterminate Jews.
I already have said that not even approximately did I know to what degree this thing took place.
Nicht schuldig.
Julius Streicher, publisher of the widely read anti-Semitic paper Der Stürmer, that advocated violent persecution.
I don't believe that those who had been given the order by the Führer to carry out the killings or to pass an order to kill, that those people would have been made to do this by my periodical.
Ich bekenne mich nicht schuldig.
Wilhelm Keitel, head of the military.
You remember the basic idea of the order, that human life costs absolutely nothing? You signed this order with this statement?
Ja.
Alfred Jodl, Hitler's most trusted military advisor.
Was ich getan habe oder tun musste, kann ich reinen Gewissens vor Gott, vor der Geschichte und vor meinem Volke verantworten.
Hans Frank, ruler of occupied Poland, where the Nazis liquidated Jewish ghettos and where Auschwitz is located. Like the others, Frank denied knowledge of atrocities, but was one of the few to express remorse.
Gegen das Judentum jahrelang geführt und wir haben uns in Äußerungen ergangen und mein Tagebuch ist mir selbst als Zeuge gegenübergetreten. 1000 Jahre werden vergehen, um diese Schuld von Deutschland nicht wegzunehmen.
Conclusion. Frank was a willing and knowing participant in a program involving the murder of at least 3 million Jews. The tribunal finds that Frank is guilty under count
I have to admit that I'm unfortunately old enough to have been here in 1945 and 46. And I spent 6 to 8 hours a day, primarily not in the courtroom, but in the prison.
My father is speaking to a tour group visiting the historic courtroom.
We would interview the defendants and try to figure out what made people do the things they actually did. Occasionally, I would sit in the gallery or visitors gallery, which was above where you're sitting now. And I remember there was an elevator to the downstairs and then a long walk over to the prison.
In 1945, there were 4 prison buildings at Nuremberg. Only one of the original buildings remains, and it too is scheduled to be torn down. For my father, this is a final opportunity to visit a place where so many memories abide.
I had a prison pass that was good 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we would use our time when court was in session interviewing witnesses, and the witnesses were kept in the upper tiers, main defendants being down here. I remember Goering being on the left side, pretty much at the end of the line, which may have signified that he is the head of all these people, but Goering, and then followed by the military men like Jodl and Keitel, the admirals, Raeder and Dönitz, and then an assortment of others, from Ribbentrop to Frank and Rosenberg and Seyss-Inquart. We had Rudolf Höss, the commandant of Auschwitz, was one of the witnesses in the upper tiers. So was Himmler's wife and his daughter Gudrun on the lower level on this side. I remember we were standing here just about at the place where Stryker's cell was. I remember one incident that a little short lieutenant, I think she was Jewish. Stryker certainly thought she was Jewish because according to Stryker's criteria, she looked Jewish. But she would come down here. She hated Stryker's guts, and she would take a little string and tie a little cutout paper doll and dangle the string in front of Stryker's window, signifying that he would soon be hanging. That was one of, and then Stryker would get extremely upset and would even occasionally disrobe and show his rear end to her and make all kinds of gestures. I mean, it would just absolutely enrage him.
Is the door the same? Is everything the same in terms of...
The door, I think the doors were really identical. The little flap on the door was kept open, and they had guards at every door because after Lai committed suicide, when he only had 2 or 3 guards walking around, they would assign a guard to every single door on the lower level where the defendants were, and they had a light with a metal shade that was placed over that so they could see the whole room. The bed was mounted to the wall. It was kind of a steel bed, but the tables, unlike this table, they had a very thin top that could not be used to push up against the window and stand on it. It would not have supported it. And they did have a chair. So one of us would sit on a chair, and the psychiatrist would sometimes sit on a chair, and sometimes he would sit on the bed right next to the prisoner. and sometimes I would sit next to the prisoner.
My father worked with 3 doctors assigned to gather psychological data about the prisoners. Psychologist Gustav Gilbert spoke German and collected most of his information about the defendants himself. Gilbert later wrote a book about his interviews. Psychiatrist Douglas Kelly also wrote a book, though he left the trial early. 12 years later, Kelly killed himself in a manner eerily similar to Goering. At the Nuremberg prison, Kelly was replaced by psychiatrist Leon Goldenson, who relied on my father for translation and other matters with the prisoners. Some of Goldenson's notes were collected into a book published in 2004. In the Nuremberg interviews, my father's role as translator is cited many times.
I came in many times alone, first of all, to get information for the psychiatrist. And I came in on my own because I had questions that I had for the prisoners, and I was very fortunate. I was not limited to go into the cell with someone else. The guard was standing outside. The door was shut behind us, and then it was reopened when we were ready to go out.
My father was locked inside with perpetrators of evil, who represented the sins of a nation that he once loved. He was 22 years old, standing at a decisive crossroad in history.
These crimes with which we deal are unprecedented. First, because of the shocking number of victims.
The momentous question facing the world and my father were related. How could any reconciliation with Germany be considered in the wake of such monumental crimes and nationwide complicity?
The Nazi movement was an integrated force in every city and county and hamlet. The Nazi despotism, therefore, did not consist of these individual defendants alone.
At Nuremberg, the Allies decided to vest responsibility in the Nazi leadership, though guilt was everywhere in the populace.
Incited the youth. 1,000 Sokols worked slaves. 1,000 strikers and Rosenbergs stirred up hate. 1,000 Franks tortured and killed. 1,000 Speers and Funks administered. The party power.
For 1 year, the Allies projected a show of justice, though the scope of the crimes seemed to nullify all notions of justice.
For the extermination program which took the lives of 5 million Jews.
But if a relationship with Germany were to be rebuilt, some sense of justice would have to be served in the eyes of the world and my father.
After I talked to them, they were the prisoners. I was able to walk out the door, and the door locked behind me. So that was a tremendously gratifying feeling to have these people here. And it was also a feeling that made me later on reconcile my feelings with Germans or Germany as such, because I felt that I was part of the force that punished these people, that did away with the evil that had done so much harm to me and my family. We're now sitting in a jail cell, and we're waiting for the verdict. On the end, you can see Stryker and Goering. Now, this is a position that Stryker struck many times, that defiant arms at the side. He even did this in Nuremberg. It's funny because you look at these pictures and you think back to where you were or how you were or what you were in 1936. And then 10 years later, exactly 1946, you were standing with the arms on the side, and they were prisoners behind bars and were just about to be hung.
Nuremberg made possible my father's reconciliation with his Germanness. To appreciate how remarkable that was, it is necessary to understand the depth of his loss.
Now, everyone was required to have one of these?
That's right.
Yes. Yeah. Now this apparently is my sister's Margot, and this is my mother's here.
Did Margot actually sign this, by the way? Is that just your signature?
My father and I are viewing these identification cards at the Munich archives for the first time.
Hans Heinz Israel Triest.
In July of 1938, the Nazis declared that Jews over the age of 15 must carry ID cards at all times.
15 years when this photograph was made, 15 years old.
Right.
But you look much more older. Mm-hmm. You look like 18, 19.
Jews were required to present these ID cards upon demand by a police agent.
One for the police department.
Jews were also given an extra name, Israel for males,
Look at your mother, Dad. Yeah,
Sarah for females.
Dad, Lena Sarah Triest, she signed it. It's not enough they put a J. She had to actually sign the name that they gave to her.
In addition to the ID cards, there is other registration information at the Munich archives.
These are actually filled out in my mother's.
This is your mother's handwriting, yeah?
Right.
Most of the personal artifacts of the Triest family history in pre-war Germany were lost under Nazi aggression.
Born in Bamberg, Upper Franconia. She has
all the photos we have of pre-Nazi times were donated after the war by people who had copies.
Yeah, this is a picture of my grandfather, who at that time was 89 years old.
Now, Moritz is a Triest, so he's your father's father.
Mm-hmm.
My great-grandfather. He lived to how old? What was the age?
Until the Nazis killed him. He was deported to Theresienstadt in 42, and he died the same year. So he was 92. And he, I believe, died of illness, dysentery, in Theresienstadt.
Whose is this?
My dad's. He's born in Bamberg, and he was formerly the manager of a Herrenwäschefabrik, in shirts, pajamas, dressing gowns, that type of things. Mm-hmm. And then the owner. Also, das ist Müllerstraße 2.
Das ist sehr schön.
My grandfather's former textile factory was damaged by Allied bombing near the end of the war. It was restored by the city of Munich in 1950 to be reused as a commercial property. Johann Strauss has owned the building since 1978, and he too runs a textile business.
The whole house is just like it was. They just rebuilt the roof.
Grandfather Bertold had owned the factory for almost 20 years, until the Nazis made it impossible for Jews to operate businesses. My grandfather was forced to sell in the summer of 1938, and this was a psychological turning point in a reluctant realization. His livelihood was over, and so too was the family's long and storied history in Germany.
He spent
in the army from 5th of August 1914 to the 6th of February 1919. He was a field hospital inspector.
My grandfather was one of thousands of German Jews who served in the German army in World War I. German Jews believed that this patriotic service would further their assimilation into German society by demonstrating their deep and secular loyalty to the nation.
These are pictures of a parade.
That hope was not dispelled by the Nazis' march to power that began in Munich.
Spanning the Isar.
Munich was the birthplace and incubator of the National Socialist Party. The Nazis considered the city the mythic capital of their movement. It is here that they first organized and honed the mass machinery of terror.
And next to Hitler is Goering, and this Frick, who was in Nuremberg as one of the defendants, and on the very end is Himmler, who is dressed in the uniform of the SS, while all the others are dressed in the uniform of the SA, the stormtroopers. That's an interesting picture. We had these boxes all over the city, but primarily at streetcar stops. There was a box displaying the Stürmer right where that silver car is standing over there, underneath that P for parking.
My father lived in this apartment house on Reitmoorstrasse from age 2 until the family had to flee.
You're standing right here. And our apartment was 1, 2, 3. It was actually up here in this section. So it was completely eliminated.
Yeah.
And I think it was bombed just a couple of weeks before the end of the war. But of course, there's also a lot of rubble inside of the building because undoubtedly.
These images, both still and moving, were shot by my father in 1947 after the Nuremberg verdict. Like the verdict itself, my father regarded the destruction of his hometown as appropriate retribution against a population complicit in crimes against humanity and his family. My father has a meticulous memory that is able to contrast very different experiences of the same place. In Munich, his memory is even more attuned, surrounded by the things that bear witness.
They bear witness to good things and bad things. You have memories of times when the stormtroopers knocked on your door, and you have times when you heard a knock and it was the woman delivering fresh rolls. You have extreme opposites. You compare your rather labored walk up 3 or 4 flights of stairs with the fact that as a kid you took 3 or 4 stairs with 1 step.
In the Reitmoorstrasse apartment, the Triests lived an upper-middle-class lifestyle. My grandmother Lena liked to entertain. Lee, as she was known, was 13 years younger than her husband Bertolt. She was outgoing and vivacious, and contrasted his more reserved demeanor. My father's sister Margot is 6 years younger than him. Unlike her brother, even her early childhood was overshadowed by the threat of Nazism, and she does not feel the same affinity as my father for the place they fled.
When he was young, that was his happiest life because he was with my parents. That was his home. And he and my mother were very, very close. My mother was not only his mother, but she was his best friend. She was, I think, everything to him. I'm sure that that has a lot to do why he felt comfortable in Germany, and he still feels comfortable. It's his home. It was his security.
In the Trieste household, like the households of most German Jews, Judaism did not occupy a central place. My father had his bar mitzvah at 13, but the family had already become very assimilated into general German culture.
What does it mean to you to be Jewish?
That's a difficult question to answer. It means that I had a terrible life as a youngster, that I lost my home and, above all, my family. And when I think in terms of being Jewish, I said, well, I lost them because I was Jewish. If I would not have been Jewish, I may still have been able to live a normal life, and not that I ever had any desire to be any other religion, but it's just that being Jewish did certainly, for my family, not bring us any good luck. That's pretty much the same layout from what I remember.
Yeah?
My room having been back there, and the living room. That was my parents' bedroom.
This is your parents' bedroom.
And there was a door, a door going through from one.
there.
Yeah, it's still there. From one bedroom to
We are invited into the apartment of Ursula and Andreas Jung.
Actually, at one time, Margot was in this room, I was in this room.
Not only were the apartments restored after the war to their original plan, there is a presence here that seems reminiscent to my father.
The only difference is it's much more modern today. We had a big wood-burning stove.
You know what? The plates on
The comfort my father felt on Reitmorstrasse turned after the passage of the Nuremberg laws in 1935. He was 12 years old, and Nazi stormtroopers began to intrude his home.
I always felt safest to go back to my room, which we saw before, and close the door and go to bed. You know, they pulled the blanket over my head and figured everything is going to be all right. One time, my mother explained to them that my dad had just come from the hospital. He had bleeding ulcers, and they didn't arrest him. The only thing they did was, or one of the things, they searched the house and they confiscated a lot of books. Books which finally ended up, I guess, being burned or destroyed. And that is something which my parents were talking about later on, was a book which was called Die ganz und gar vollkommene Ehe, the whole fulfilled and completed marriage. And they told her there was no complete marriage in the Third Reich, and they took the book. It was burned down in November of 38.
So it was built in
1891.
1891.
The Orthodox synagogues in Munich were destroyed on Kristallnacht. On this night of broken glass, Nazi mobs attacked Jewish property and persons throughout Germany. It was a defining moment in the escalating violence against all aspects of Jewish life. 6 months before Kristallnacht, the large Reform temple that the Trieste had attended was leveled. The ground was made into a parking lot.
It looks like a mine of ore. You look at these beautiful stores destroyed, burned down, and in the morning after Kristallnacht, my dad met someone near the Isar and talked to him. It was the owner of Ulfelder, was a Herr Ulfelder.
On Kristallnacht, Nazi agents sought out Jewish men for arrest and beatings. They came to Reitmoorstrasse, but my father and grandfather had been forewarned of the Nazi sweep.
Both of us left and walked over to the Isar River, to the Anlagen, to the park-like walk along the Isar, and they came up and arrested Mr. Ulfelder, and they didn't bother my dad or me. I have no explanation why not, other than maybe I didn't look particularly Jewish, neither did my dad, and he also did have an emblem of an iron cross because he had fought in the First World War on the German side.
The Isar River is the final resting place for my grandfather's mementos of service to the German nation. After Kristallnacht, a relative tossed his helmet and bayonet from World War I into the current. It was now illegal for a Jew to have such items. My father's recollections so affected Ursula, her husband Andreas told us later, that she started crying after we left their apartment. The Jungs asked others in the building if they knew of someone who once lived here and would remember the Triests. They would find a witness. My father left Munich on August 31st, 1939. The family had just obtained temporary visas to go to Luxembourg. His parents knew the urgency of leaving, but still had a few matters to settle. So my father left alone.
That train ride into Luxembourg was in 3 stages, because there was a train that went to Trier. There was a train from Trier to Wasserbillig, which is the border between Luxembourg and Germany. And there was a morning train from Wasserbillig to Luxembourg.
On the morning of September 1st, as my father waited for his train at Wasserbillig, Hitler invaded Poland. World War II had begun.
I was 16 years old, but I was anxious to get out of Germany. I was anxious about going to Luxembourg, about being free, about being out of Nazi Germany. I was very confident and looking forward to that my parents would follow soon and my sister Margot would follow soon.
A few weeks later, my grandparents and Aunt Margot left Munich. Jews were forbidden to take money out of the country and were arrested at the border if caught trying.
And my parents had some money in the backs of some brushes, hair brushes. And Mother also put a lot of toilet rolls in the suitcases, so when they opened it up, the toilet rolls would fall out, and that was a distraction to them. It was still fresh enough and not done by too many people. My mother was very clever. She really was. She was gutsy, she was clever.
In Luxembourg, the family stayed in the city of Diekirch. The Luxembourg government required Jewish refugees to rent rooms in assigned hotels. For 9 months, the Triests waited to emigrate to America. The visas were finally granted in April 1940, but the family no longer had enough money for everyone to travel. So again, my father was sent ahead, accompanied only as far as Luxembourg City by his mother.
When I left my dad and when I left Margot, it was a goodbye with the thought or the belief that I would see them in a couple of weeks, and that it was just a matter until they got their money together and they got their tickets
and I would meet them in New York. And at that point, I really didn't have too much problem saying goodbye, because at this point I did not have any bad experience saying goodbye.
The farewell at the Diekirch station would be the last time my father would see his father. The farewell at the Luxembourg station would be the last time my father would see his mother.
So what's your mother thinking at this time, best you can tell? She says goodbye. Did she have tears? Did she cry? Did she worry?
My mother, probably, she didn't cry.
How old is your mother here?
My mother at that time was 41.
And when she said goodbye from the platform and you were in the train, she waved? Did you see anything in her face?
She actually leaned out, she leaned into the window and I leaned out of the window and she kissed me. Maybe as a mother she was more concerned, maybe as a mother she even had thoughts of if anything goes wrong she may not see me again. I did not at that time think that anything would happen where I would not see my parents and Margot again.
My father's train took him to Antwerp and a ship bound for New York. As he boarded, he got a telegram from his father that the rest of the family would follow in 2 weeks. It would be too late.
Die Stunde des entscheidendsten Kampfes für die Zukunft der deutschen Nation ist gekommen.
The Nazis invaded the lowlands just as the family approached the Belgium-Holland border.
We heard the bombs and we were arrested at the border. Not because we were Jewish, we were arrested because we were Germans. Although our passports had a big J on it and was not acknowledged as a German passport. At that time, because Holland was at war with Germany, we were Germans. Then they put us in a truck with other people they arrested. And we went through a small town called Rosendahl. And as we went through, the whole town went up in flames. I mean, we just missed it by a hair because the bombs kept falling. The police drove us to a Dutch tribunal, and they decided that we were Jewish and not German, and that we could go. But there was no place to go. Then the news came that the Germans are really coming closer and closer. So my parents decided we should leave there and go back to Belgium. And during the walk, bombs were falling all over the place. And my dad told my mother and myself to go into the ditches on the side of the road, and he would stand and look at the bombs, and my mother would get furious at him. Probably after maybe 5 hours of walking, the Belgian police were patrolling, and they arrested us. Now all of a sudden we were Germans again. Then they put us on a little truck and they drove us to Antwerp. We went to an old armory, and there they separated women and children from men. Put my dad in the armory. They told us we could leave. That was in 1940, and my dad never got out of the camp. I mean, he got out of that camp, but from that day on, he was in a concentration camp.
In the south of France, in the town of Le Mille, there is an old brickyard. The yard was a detention and then deportation camp run by the Vichy government, the French regime that collaborated with the Nazis and which ruled half the country from 1940 to 1944. At Camp Le Mille, hundreds of European intellectuals and artists were interred. So were thousands of European Jews. My grandfather was one of them.
So Mother decided we had to get there. And the only way you could get out from Belgium was through the black market, because the Germans wouldn't give you a visa to leave, and they really didn't want you to stay either, because when you're Jewish, you should be eliminated from the world.
The building where the prisoners were housed has not changed much since my grandfather was here. In this area, Jews held their daily prayers. On the second floor, the prisoners slept side by side upon the dust and filth. There was no heat, water, or sanitation. On the walls, some writings of the prisoners are still visible. Others were defaced once the factory resumed its work after the war, as if the camp never was. To reach Le Mille, my grandmother and Aunt Margot endured a harrowing journey that included 6 months in a French prison.
When we found each other, we were all elated. I mean, we thought he was dead and he thought we were dead.
Margot and my grandmother lived outside of Le Mille for 3 months. On some weekends, my grandfather was allowed to leave the camp.
There was a little village near the camp, so we stayed there for weekends sometimes. And I remember waking up one morning, I had a terrible dream that I was separated from my parents and that the Germans were going to kill them. And I told my mother about that dream, and she told me, it was just a dream and not to worry about it, it wouldn't happen. And it happened 2 months after that.
In the second week of August, 1942, my aunt and grandmother were arrested by French authorities and taken to the camp.
And we were there for a week. And then they came and they said that the parents had to make up their minds if they wanted their kids to stay with them or if they wanted them to leave. And since there was no food and very little milk, they had some rations of milk from the Quakers for us, and that's it for the kids. None of the parents wanted their kids to stay, and the parents knew that they're going to be deported.
Outside the main building, buses awaited the children. Arrangements were made by the Children's Aid Society in France, or the OSE. OSE workers privately counseled parents not to take their children on the trains because the OSE had learned of the death camps in Eastern Europe. My grandfather and grandmother said goodbye to their daughter in this lot.
Well, my mother was standing, my father was on his knees. And he broke down. I don't think he said very much. I think they kept saying, "Be a good girl." And we'll see you soon again, which we all knew was a lie. My mother didn't instill that she was fearful. She instilled the feeling that she was there and she's going to be able to handle it. And there was no doubt in her mind. I don't know if that was so or not, but that's the feeling that she instilled.
A period rail car memorializes the transport of Jews from Camp Lemil. In August of 1942, Jewish parents could choose to leave their children with the OSE. The next month, French authorities eliminated that choice and ordered children onto the trains. 2,500 Jews were deported from Lemil. My grandparents' train left Lemil on August 12th. Along the way, they tossed a postcard into the French countryside. A few days later, it arrived at the place where Margot was taken.
And it said I should be a good girl. And that they, I don't know if it said anything about where they were going, but that they would see me soon.
From Lemil, my grandmother and grandfather were taken to Camp Drancy, named after the suburb of Paris where it was located. A memorial marks where the camp entrance once was. Drancy was one of the transit camps from which Jews were deported to death camps out east. It was administered and guarded by the French. 70,000 Jews were sent from Drancy to Auschwitz. Camp Drancy is the last place my grandparents were known to be alive. They were put on a train to Auschwitz, though there is no record of their arriving.
We don't know how long they were in the freight cars. There was no food. There was no water. So But I always hoped that they were killed early. But Mother could have worked. I know she could. She would have worked if they wanted it.
After leaving her parents, Margot was eventually moved by the OSE to a safe house in the Limoges region. Le Carré was one of 25 OSE homes in France set up to hide Jewish children whose parents had been deported. Margot stayed at Le Carré with about 100 other girls. She became close friends with a girl her age named Steffi. They lived at the home for about 4 months, sequestered in the Central Mountains. Then the Gestapo intensified its hunt for Jewish children in France, and the OSE had to move the girls from Le Carré.
So this lady came to the home and said that the next day or 2 days, Steffi and I would leave, and that we would each have 10 little kids, 4 years and up, under us, and we would have to take them across the border into Switzerland.
Margot and the other children arrived in the French border city of Annemasse by train. Their first night was spent in a secret OSE boarding house. The next night was Margot's 14th birthday, April 19th, 1943. Margot led 10 small children along railroad tracks toward Switzerland. Margot had to keep the children quiet so as not to alert nearby residents who might inform Nazi patrols.
We had to calm down their fears, and that's very similar to a mother and children. That's exactly what my mother was trying to do, was to calm down my fears by being very stoic and not showing it.
The walk along the tracks took 20 minutes. Margot and the 10 other children crossed into Geneva near this spot. My aunt believes her composure was a gift handed down through her mother.
My grandmother, her mother must have been a very strong woman, otherwise she wouldn't have survived Theresienstadt. So Mother must have gotten some strength from her mother. And I'm sure I must have inherited some of her strength myself.
Margot was safe in Switzerland when her brother arrived at the Battle of Normandy as a machine gunner replacement. On Omaha Beach, my father found a leaflet of German war propaganda. He translated it to an American officer.
He asked me whether I spoke German fluently. I said yes. He said, well, I just got a directive from the army telling me to retain the German-speaking personnel that passes through here because we may need them in intelligence. Being kept back on Omaha Beach for eventual service in intelligence, my life expectancy, I think, increased several 100%, because machine gunners at that time had a very short life expectancy.
My father served in an intelligence unit of the 5th Corps. His main duty was to interrogate townspeople in the wake of the Nazi retreat. No one would admit to collaborating with the Nazis, even in Germany, where he photographed scenes of ruination.
I had no bad feelings when I saw bombed and destroyed cities, and I didn't particularly have much pity on the people, because after what they did to my people, I felt that they had very little reason to complain.
In Germany, my father's battalion came to the city of Turgau. Again, he took pictures. Soviet troops arrived from the east, the first time these Allied forces would meet. After high-level negotiations, American troops were commanded to stop at the Elbe River and allow the Soviets to take Berlin. This was especially disappointing to my father, given where he had been just 2 weeks before.
We usually carried at least one camera in the Jeep, and I shot a few pictures.
What were you thinking as you were walking around and covering sort of the event, or taking the pictures of what was going on?
Well, I was thinking that that may very well be like the camp that my parents were sent to.
If you had to tell us something that we should take with us and that we should pass along, what is it? Anything about this day, anything about Buchenwald, anything about what it represents that we should remember?
Don't let it happen again.
My father has not been to Buchenwald since April of 1945. He entered the camp just after it was liberated. At that time, he already knew from Margot that his parents had been put on a train that was headed toward Auschwitz. But he did not know their fate, and consoled himself with two different hopes.
You never put someone with the dead until you're very sure that they're dead, because somehow miracles happen, and they may have been alive.
My father's other hope would become what he needed to believe. If his parents had been killed, he had to feel they did not suffer what he witnessed here.
We saw the conditions in Buchenwald, but I had a feeling that my parents probably never had a chance to survive. Sometimes people even died on the train going there, more than not, because people at this time were sick and old and had been imprisoned, some of them many years before, so they were weak.
It never entered your mind that your parents might have looked like these people?
You try not to think about it. When you have anyone that you love, you don't like to picture them in a terrible state. You kind of put it out of your mind. Yes, we all knew that this is the way people looked, and we took pictures and we saw what the pictures looked like. And those were corpses. There were a lot of dead people. And sure, it comes to your mind, but you somehow try to put it out of your mind. You somehow think that, well, this can't be. You know, it was not real.
Buchenwald was a concentration camp. Auschwitz, a death camp. Near the end of the war, distinctions were lost, as Nazi guards at all the camps sought to kill everyone they could. Buchenwald had operated for 8 years and was one of the largest camps in Germany. 250,000 people were interred here. 56,000 were killed, most often by being worked and starved to death. If my father had not escaped Germany, he would have been sent to a camp like this one.
My life could very well have ended the same way. Being young, I may have been kept for a short period for labor, unlike my parents who already were past an age where the Nazis considered getting useful work out of people.
When Buchenwald was made into a memorial, many of the buildings were brought down. Walking the grounds, the devastation around you comes to inhabit you. This feeling is deepened by the images displayed. They affirm the memory of the things that remain here and that bear the terrible burden of witness.
Even today, when I look at the pictures, I still look for whether I possibly would recognize them. Although it's pretty difficult, the way people were treated and starved, to even recognize people that you have known before they were sent to camp, because their bodies, their faces, their features changed so much that they were hardly recognizable as the same people.
The name Buchenwald means beechwood and refers to the trees around the camp. The camp is located near the city of Weimar, often regarded as the cultural capital of Germany. Weimar was home to Goethe, Schiller, Nietzsche, and Liszt. The Nazi regime was intent on imposing its agenda on German classical culture. So it built a concentration camp in the same forest where Goethe had composed some of the greatest verse in German literature, including Faust. At Buchenwald, my father's disdain for his native culture reached its peak.
I had easy solutions for all the Germans at that time. I felt that we should bring them into camp and treat them exactly the same way they treated the prisoners. And even later on when I was in Nuremberg, I just felt that hanging, and a lot of defendants died by hanging, was much too easy and quick a death. for as punishments for the crimes that they had committed.
After liberating Buchenwald, American soldiers rounded up German civilians who lived near the camp. The Germans were ordered to see the atrocities and to help remove the corpses. My father questioned these civilians about the genocide and brutality in their backyard.
You know, when you asked them, you got actually the same answers, simply that we didn't know. We had no idea. They may have lived right across the street from the camp, but we just didn't know how things were inside of the camp, and we never realized what happened, and we are just as surprised as you are. And
did you believe them?
No, of course not. I didn't believe anything anybody said. And I also didn't believe that when I interrogated people that you did not find a single Nazi in the whole country. They just didn't exist. And it was pretty difficult to believe that there were no Nazi in Nazi Germany.
These happenings could also be seen by the civilian population from the windows of their houses.
At the Nuremberg Tribunal, the British prosecutor Sir Hartley Shawcross recounted Nazi atrocities and then told the court.
Years ago, Goethe said of the German people, "It is sad that they ingenuously submit to any mad scoundrel who appeals to their lowest instincts, who confirms in them their vices and teaches them to conceive nationalism as isolation and brutality." With what a voice of prophecy he spoke. This trial must form a milestone in the history of civilization, not only bringing retribution to these guilty men, not only marking that right shall, in the end, triumph over evil, but also that the ordinary people of the world, and I make no distinction now between friend and foe, are now determined that the individual must transcend the state. And then shall those other words of Goethe be translated into fact. Great through understanding and love, through mediation and the spirit. Thus ought the German people to behave. That is their destiny.
A month after the liberation of Buchenwald, the war with Germany ended. My father visited his sister in Switzerland. They had not seen each other for almost 5 years. Resigned to their parents' fate, they were resolved to honor their parents' strength and celebrate life.
I feel there must be a reason why certain people have to endure tragedies. But I also feel that maybe because certain people are stronger than others, they have to endure more. Other times I wonder. I mean, it's you know, it's hard to go through this and really be sure of anything.
My father was now stationed in Pilsen, Czechoslovakia. Theresienstadt was close to Pilsen. The Nazis had produced a notorious propaganda film about the concentration camp. It was intended to deceive the world about the treatment of Jews at all the camps, using Theresienstadt as the example.
Auf dem Schiff der alten Festung verbringt bei strahlender Sonne jeder gerne ein paar Stunden seiner Freizeit.
Prisoners at the camp were forced to stage the pretense. 33,000 Jews were killed at Theresienstadt. Among the dead was my great-grandfather, Moritz Triest. My great-grandmother, Rosa Westheimer, survived the camp and was reunited with her grandson at Pilsen.
She had lost over 60 or 65 pounds from the time that I had seen her last, and she'd been through a lot. There really were no provisions what you do with people that had lost their country, had lost their home. So we devised a plan where she would travel to Munich in the jeep with me and would wear the coat of a lieutenant, a trench coat. And in fact, whenever we encountered any military police, she drew salutes because she was an officer for the time being, which was more than I did. I was able to get her to Munich, and there was a home that had been set up after the occupation of Munich to accommodate older Jewish people that may have been found just like she and that had no place to go.
6 years after fleeing Munich, my father stood above the Isar. Only the river seemed untouched by the devastation. He had come full circle. His tour of duty was about to end. His chance to participate in political justice was about to begin.
I was a soldier when I came to Nuremberg, and I was here maybe 2-3 weeks. And I actually was discharged from the American Army in this country so that...
At Nuremberg, my father officially became an American citizen and a civilian member of the War Department.
In addition to working with the prisoners, one of my functions...
No longer a soldier, my father needed to find his own place in the city.
I had not been in Nuremberg before.
Never?
My father's friendship with Sarah Bailey began during the Nuremberg trial.
So I remember that. But I think we were up in the second floor up there. I think we probably had this section over here.
At that time, Sarah was dating Britt Bailey, my father's roommate at his Nuremberg apartment. Britt and Sarah were married for more than 50 years. Britt passed away a few years ago. Sarah and their son happened to be visiting Nuremberg during our stay. Sarah and my father have not been here in almost 60 years.
No, I want you to picture this apartment. Most of these, if you remember, these houses were down. This house was down, that house was down.
Nuremberg, like most major German cities, was reduced to rubble by Allied bombing.
And you could see from here practically over to the park.
The city was notorious for its mass Nazi rallies, extolling racial hatred. It was also notorious for the Nuremberg laws.
German citizens are only those of German or related blood, willing to serve the German Reich and people. Marriages between Jews...
Goering proclaimed the Nuremberg laws in 1935. They deprived German Jews of their civil rights, property, and ultimately their very recognition as human beings. Amid Nuremberg's devastation, the large prison and palace of justice were still intact. For these reasons, both practical and symbolic, Nuremberg was chosen as the site for the war crimes trial.
Goering was still as pompous as he always was. Stryker was still as adamant in his beliefs as he always was. He was probably the foremost Jew hater and Jew baiter in Germany. But I had gone into Stryker to get some information, and when I walked in, he said, "You know, I can smell a Jew from a mile away. I can tell them by their looks, by the way they walk, by their behind, by their body, by their hair, and I know that you are a pure Aryan and your people must have come from a Nordic country." It proved how wrong Stryker was, because looking at Stryker, he did really not have the pure Aryan look himself. Compare it to the pictures that the National Socialists drew of what is Aryan. Stryker was probably the opposite. But Stryker went to the gallows, giving the Hitler salute, and was defiant to the very end.
In the prison cells of the Nazi leaders, my father always kept his composure, regardless of what they said. He concealed his outrage even when he met with Rudolf Hess, a witness for the prosecution. Hess was the commandant of Auschwitz.
You stand in front of a man that murdered your parents, and what can you do? I personally would have liked to do the same thing to all these guys that they did to so many millions of innocent people. I would have loved to throw them into a concentration camp and slowly kill them the way they did with so many other people. But we weren't here to do that. We were here to get information, to relay that information to the proper authorities, and to interview the prisoners, and that we did.
The overall goal of the psychological study was to see what kind of person could commit such evil. Whether any insight was gained is unclear, and my father believes not. With rare exception, the prisoners disclaimed responsibility for the crimes of the Nazi regime. There were no dark, deep-seated motives for their misdeeds. They followed orders in mental lockstep.
Any one of the defendants, if I remember, had the feeling that the only reason they're on trial is because they lost the war and we were the victors and they were the vanquished. I don't think any one of them sat there and said, well, we did terrible things and therefore we're in front of the tribunal and we deserve to be punished.
The wheels of justice grinding slowly on seem to bore big stuff.
They may be larger than life as far as history is concerned.
The entire Hitler dynasty is charted so that the blame can be squarely placed on the guilty man.
But they certainly did not offer a picture of any superiority. They were just plain ordinary people, and some were a pitiful looking group.
Could it be a slight case of rope burn, Mr. Goering?
Hermann Goering was very heavily into drugs, that we slowly had to wean him off. Although Goering was very actively involved in the whole Nazi program of exterminating Jews. Goering denied any major guilt. He felt what he did was perfectly all right. He was also, as far as being interviewed, he was very congenial. He was very easy to talk to. He liked to be talked to because he liked to be in the limelight. Stryker and I actually had more conversations. He was a cruddy personality, really. Ribbentrop was kind of a shaky and yellow looking, and he was certainly not the arrogant foreign minister of the Third Reich that he had been for so many years. Rudolf Höss,
Commandant of Auschwitz.
Commandant of Auschwitz. He didn't have any characteristics that were really outstanding. We walked into his cell to interview him, and the first thing he did was complain because we had taken his shoelaces away, and he had socks, and he told us that his feet were cold and he would appreciate if he could get his shoes back.
Wann war das?
Das war
Hess did not grasp the irony of his complaints, even as he testified about the death camp he ran.
was Verpflegung, Unterbringung.
His demeanor on the stand was that of bureaucratic matter-of-factness.
Wie in jedem anderen Gefängnis
An affidavit he wrote was read into the record at Nuremberg.
I commanded Auschwitz until 1 December 43 and estimate that at least 2,500,000 victims were executed and exterminated there by gassing and burning, and at least another 500,000 succumbed to starvation and disease. Those who were fit for work were sent into the camp. Others were sent immediately to the extermination plant. Children of tender years were invariably exterminated, since by reason of their youth they were unable to work. Still another
Like other prisoners at Nuremberg, Hess divorced conscience and duty, and even claimed such division to be part of the German character.
It took from 3 to 15 minutes to kill the people in the death chamber, depending upon climatic conditions. We knew when the people were dead because their screaming stopped. After the bodies were removed, our special commandos extracted the gold from the teeth of the corpses. Included among the executed and burnt were approximately 20...
He was actually very proud. He was very proud that he not only obeyed orders, but that he met his quota and actually did better than his quota. He was very proud of the fact that he accomplished what he was supposed to do and accomplished even more. Just looking at him, you couldn't tell that the man is evil. And yet, knowing his history or talking to him, you could pretty soon find out that he was evil. So sometimes you can sit in front of a man who can be a mass murderer, and he doesn't look any different than another fellow that sits next to him and has never done a bad thing in his life.
Hess was tried and executed at Auschwitz 6 months after the Nuremberg verdict. Of the 21 defendants at Nuremberg, 18 were found guilty. 7 received prison terms ranging from 10 years to life. 11 were sentenced to death. Goering committed suicide by cyanide 2 hours before his scheduled execution. The other 10 men were hanged. Their ashes were disposed in a secret location.
I didn't personally see them hang.
but I saw pictures afterwards, and I was very glad that at least we had eliminated some of the people from this world. But in my estimation, really not enough of it.
It is still hard for me to imagine how my father could be face to face with these men and suppress his indignation, so close to such evil, in such banal guise.
You know, they always tried to blame it on someone, and the most convenient people to blame it on were those that no longer lived. Hitler was number one. It was all Hitler's fault. He gave the orders. And then Himmler was number two, because he no longer lived. He had committed suicide. Just like Hearst told me, I received the orders, I carried them out, I did the best I could. And it was the same with the other defendants. Hitler gave the orders, and it's very easy to blame someone that can't deny it. But then later on, I happened to work in denazification in Munich. It was very difficult to find anyone that had ever been a Nazi. It was just like no one in this country was a Nazi. And then you wondered who ran the country and who did it.
The collective disavowal expressed by the Nazi leadership seemed to characterize an entire nation. Even in Munich, the Nazi past seemed already buried in the rubble of the city and German psyche. Working in denazification, my father was approached by many German civilians seeking his influence. They would bring letters and photos trying to show that they once had Jewish acquaintances. Those who knew his family said condolences, whereas once they had turned their backs. Hans Fischach was a childhood friend of my father's when they both lived in the Reitmoorstrasse apartment house.
Sind deine Eltern umgekommen?
In Auschwitz.
Genau, ja, das ist ja nicht zu fassen, es ist ja nicht so.
My father and Hans have not seen each other for 70 years and have not spoken for even longer. Hans broke off their friendship when he enrolled in the Hitler Leadership School.
Sind die Parkettböden?
Die waren bei uns nicht so, nein.
Ich hab's auch nicht so.
We returned to the home of Ursula and Andreas Jung. Andreas arranged this meeting because he wanted to hear how Hans would explain the past.
Politik, ein garstig Lied, pfui, ein politisch Lied, hat der Goethe geschrieben, nicht? Im Auerbach-Keller. Und so ist es auch.
Ja, wir waren im selben Mietshaus und unsere Wege sind eben
anders verlaufen, ja, aber das ist doch hochinteressant an sich.
Ja,
also in unserer
In his briefcase, Hans has come prepared with a number of items, including a book he wrote about his youth.
Ich habe dieses Buch Nächste Hosenbusch 83.
The book makes virtually no mention of Nazism.
Und eines Tages erhalte ich einen Brief.
Hans produces a letter from a Jewish person who once lived in the neighborhood and who liked the book.
Da schrieb mir, ja, also Sie werden sich sicher wundern, aus Jerusalem einen Brief zu bekommen und so weiter. Da schauen wir her. Das ist also Federfing. Das war damals.
Ja, so kann ich dich noch erinnern.
Kannst du dich noch erinnern?
In der Uniform, glaube ich, habe ich dich nie gesehen.
Das kann sein, ja, das kann sein.
Hans has another book that he did not write, and that is about the elite Führer's school he attended. It shows a picture of him in his Nazi school uniform. After graduation, Hans joined the German army.
He was in the Panzer Division, and he fought in Normandy, among other things. He was wounded
3 times. The third time lost the sight of his eye.
Ja, es ist schon noch drin, es ist das eigene Auge, aber da habe ich einen Splitter hier unten drin gehabt. Ne? Und da ist die Hornhaut ist zerrissen wie Sekuritglas. Ne? Und das ist wieder vernarbt, aber sehen kann ich nichts. Ich kann dich nicht mal hier sitzen sehen. Ne? Mit dem rechten Auge.
In dem Gebäude hier in der Reitmannstraße 53, da waren ja damals 4 oder 5 jüdische Familien. Was mit den anderen Leuten passiert ist, ich glaube, die Kaplans haben es nicht überlebt. Das sind ja so viele Leute.
Ja,
mein Großvater, der hier mit uns in 39 gewohnt hat, der war damals 89. Den haben sie in 42 nach Theresienstadt verschleppt. Und der ist dort 2 Monate später gestorben, bei 92 Jahren. Ne? Und das waren alle Leute, die seit Generationen Deutsche waren.
Genau.
Mein Vater war im Ersten Weltkrieg.
Even though Hans dissociated himself from the Jews he knew, went to the Nazi training school, and became an officer in the Nazi army, Hans denies ever being a Nazi or being anti-Semitic.
Who is he and what do you think of him? When he leaves now, he's gone. So share with me your thoughts on him.
Who is he or what is he? They have a very short English word. It's called Bolshevik. I don't know how his feelings were in all these years that have passed now. I do know how his feelings would have been would Germany have won the war.
What would he have been like had he won the war?
He probably would have been as National Socialistic minded as probably 80-90% of the German people. Ganz neu und versiegelt.
Ja, das ist das. So kriegt man es ja im
Die Straßenbahn kann ich mich noch erinnern.
Die 30er, ja.
Die 30er.
You
meet after many years and you're friends like you had been before the whole thing started.
Steht jedenfalls alles drauf, was du brauchst.
And somehow you completely black out the bad time in between.
Und
meine zweite 17 Jahre jünger.
Ja.
Because we are both older. A lot of people around us are not living anymore. And these were things way, way in the past. He fought on this side, I fought on that side.
After Andreas accompanies Hans from the apartment, we are surprised to find that the Jungs have prepared us lunch, to be served in the courtyard. My brother and I have always wanted to share a meal at our grandparents' home. Somehow, I feel their presence.
I don't know much about you. I don't know who you are. We've been doing fine without you, but we could only go so far.
The reason for this endeavor, to tell my father's story, is part of our faith that the children are the legs of their parents.
Said we'd give you all our
Grandfather Trieste. They carry on the journey that we believe remains continuous in all its departures.
Something skip a generation like I've heard they often can. Are you a poet or
Along this path, my father walked as a boy with the ones he loved, as did his father before him, where the river keeps the memory.
the things we've handed down?
My wife Nancy and I have 2 children, Jonathan and Katie. My brother Glenn and his wife Helena have 2 girls, Tessa and Lena, who is named after her great-grandmother.
Maybe you can help me find her and the things you do and say. And these things that we have given you, they are not so easily found.
At Reitmoorstrasse, the Jungs explain that they chose Jewish first names for their sons so that their sons would always be called into our common humanity.
Things we've handed down.
Ursula tells us about the terrible guilt her generation feels for the sins of their parents and grandparents.
You may not always be so grateful for the way that you were made.
She does not want her sons to bear this shame, but hopes they never forget what began here.
And one day you may look at us and say that you were cursed. But over time,
In Germany, my father's step is light and reconciled with a familiar music.
by our fathers and their fathers in some old and distant town.
My step is wary, and I hear the song of the Lorelei.
Things we've handed down.
And I cannot imagine his grandchildren and great-grandchildren ever walking this same ground and feeling, even for a moment, what generations before once felt. At home.